Welcome to this final edition of Security and Compliance Weekly for 2020. Today, we welcome one of our loyal listeners to the show, Dmitry Zagadsky, or DZAG, as you might know him on our Discord channel. He presented a talk, Don't End Up with a Pencil, Tips for Shopping Pen Tests at B-Side Boston last fall, that's gotten us spun up talking about pen testing. So I asked him to come on to help us navigate an in-depth discussion about my favorite topic, penetration testing. Oh, and we also have back one of our sponsors, Liam Downward, CEO of Cyrisma. He's going to be one of our new rotating co-hosts. So I asked him to join with the discussion because how can you have a discussion on pen testing without a bunch of middle-aged white guys that are bald with beards? So turn your volume down on the video so we don't blind you with our bald heads, and join us because this whole show is dedicated to pen testing as we continue our journey of tearing down silos and building bridges on Security and Compliance Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. And now, it's the show that bridges the requirements of regulations, compliance, and privacy with those of security. Your trusted source for complying with various mandates, building effective programs, and current compliance news. It's time for Security and Compliance Weekly. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM. Are you struggling to reduce your cybersecurity risks and meet compliance mandates? Wishing you could be proactive instead of reactive? You need a solution that integrates cybersecurity together to make it affordable, accessible from anywhere, and simplistic, so you can gain a return on investment on your resources. Cyrisma is your answer. It gives you a single interface to identify sensitive data, vulnerable systems, insecure configurations, track progress, and assign accountability. Visit securityweekly.com/Cyrisma today for a 7-day test drive and impress your leadership. That's Cyrisma, CYRISMA. The average cost to respond to an insider threat is $11.45 million. That's a lot of reasons why a functional insider threat program must be a core part of any modern cybersecurity strategy. To protect your organization's sensitive data and meet compliance requirements, you need controls in place to deter, detect, and disrupt insider threats. With ECRAN system, you can meet control requirements imposed by compliance mandates all within one insider threat management platform. Get your free 30-day trial at securityweekly.com/ECRAN. That's EKRAN, and fulfill your compliance requirements.
Welcome to episode 56 of Security and Compliance Weekly, recorded on December 15th, 2020. I'm your host, Mr. Jeff Mann, and joining me today are my illustrious co-hosts, Mr. Scott Lyons, Mr. Josh Marpet, and one of our new rotating co-hosts, Mr. Liam Downward. Welcome, gentlemen. Love the pen. Everybody's got their pens ready because we're having a pen testing discussion today. Before that, though, we have one more technical training this year. Our final technical training of 2020. Our friends from Vulcan Cyber will be showing us how to move beyond vulnerability scanning to vulnerability fixing. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast to register, or of course, visit securityweekly.com/on-demand to view our previously recorded webcasts and technical trainings. All right. Let me sort of set the stage for our discussion today. I think it goes back to when Dmitry, or DZAG as we know him on the Discord server, was talking about the talk that he gave at B-Sides Boston this past fall, virtual of course. Something about a pen, something about pen testing, don't end up with a pencil. And I think a lot of us have watched the talk, and we thought it was a very good talk. And for some reason, penetration testing just keeps coming up. In fact, on Paul's Security Weekly last week, we had a panel discussion all about pen testing and the state of pen testing, but I think we had a better discussion, frankly, on the Discord server. Prove me wrong, guys. But anyway, I want to talk about pen testing because one of my biggest frustrations about the whole topic of penetration testing is we tend to jump into the details and the nuts and bolts and the hows and technical techniques and what tools to use and automation and all that kind of stuff, and we never seem to get around defining it. So one of my first goals for our discussion today is I hope that we can come to a consensus on what exactly is a pen test or penetration test, and I think that's probably going to be related to things like the purpose of a pen test or the goals of a pen test. But without further ado, I should at first introduce all of our listening audience formally to Dmitry Zagadsky. D-Zag, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Look, I'm on TV.
You're on TV. Yeah, he really does have a lot of hair. It's not appropriate for him to be on this episode.
Sorry.
If you have like a skin cap or something you put on, or just cover up that mop. It's just challenging. Hey, this isn't really an interview per se, D-Zag, but I do want to give you the opportunity to just tell everybody a little bit about yourself. And of course, we'll give you the chance in a minute to answer the hot seat question. But tell us a little bit about yourself, D-Zag.
Oh, man. So I guess I'm Dmitry. I got started in security probably when I was like 12 or 13, in the good old days of having a DSL modem directly hooked up to your computer, and somebody, like a script kiddie equivalent, kind of got into my computer, planted a Trojan, and my first reaction, instead of freaking out, was, can I communicate with this person who's controlling my computer and learn what the heck they're doing and how to do it? So that was kind of like, I've always been really curious about things. So I got started in actually in high school with internships and things, and then right out of high school, I ended up having some full-time jobs with various different companies. I've kind of seen IT operations and security from a lot of different facets, from different size organizations, and I'm always just trying to learn more things and improve and make things better. But really keeping a focus on, like a lot of times the security of a system can get in the way of user experience. And so my real focus is making sure that we can kind of make security easy for people, so it's what they can do. It's the right thing. The right thing to do is also the easiest thing to do, and kind of protect everything that's important to whatever group we happen to be responsible for. But pen testing is just kind of a passion.
Well, it's a passion for a lot of us. We're passionate about it. So we'll give you the chance now. We probably have a good idea based on the interaction that we have on the Discord server, but your chance to throw in your own spin on our hot seat question. Where do you fall on the security versus compliance continuum?
So I might be one of the worst people to ever ask that question to, because I've thought about it a few times, and usually I'm on the operations side, and the compliance people are the ones who are grilling my teams on, okay, let's try to find all the things you did wrong. So I'm not a fan of compliance, but I'm not naive or silly enough to think that it's useless. It's probably it's a good baseline for an organization, for whatever compliance standard that you might need to meet. It's a good baseline to start from with your security program. But I think that sometimes my pet peeve is that sometimes compliance gets in the way of trying to do new and exciting things with security that might actually have better overall benefit. One thing is, like, almost every standard you can think of says your antivirus software needs to do either daily scans or weekly scans or something like that. But the so-called next generation antivirus products might not necessarily operate that way. but I'd be hard pressed to say that they're less effective. If anything, they're more effective. So I think having compliance is a good start, and I think that you can get, it's not the same as security. Yeah.
Is that your final answer?
It's my final answer for now.
Do you need a lifeline? Do you need to call a friend? I mean, come on, man. What do you got here?
I mean, like again, you can argue about all these things for days on end. I'm sure I'll change my mind in a year or two, but that's where I'll here trying to learn it and get better at everything.
Well, our goal, if nothing else, on this show is not necessarily to make people change their minds, but at least make people think more and deeper about things that they perhaps have taken for granted, or think, okay, I know how I stand, I know how I feel about a certain thing. So I'm not out necessarily to sway anybody's opinion of penetration testing. I'm certainly not trying to discourage anyone necessarily from pursuing a field in penetration testing. And I have to ask, Scott, are you keeping the pen testing counter as well as the PCI counter today? Is there enough room on your screen? All right.
I was trying to get away with not having to hit either of those buttons.
You missed PCI. And again.
And again, what do you mean, and again?
Well, he said it.
I'm keeping counter. I'm keeping counter.
He said it. You're missing one. You're missing him.
Missing who?
Jeff. Jeff said it.
No, I said it. There we go.
All right.
There we go.
Are we
now
caught up?
Jeff said PCI at least 3 times. PCI.
And so now you have said it.
You just want a monkey to hit a button at this point.
Pretty much.
I'm not denying that.
All right. So in getting this conversation going, because we're talking about pen testing, right?
Yep.
What is and Dmitry, I'm going to kick it to you. What is your definition of a pen test?
So a pen test. So it's funny because when I started researching some of the stuff for the talk, and in some of the events that kind of led to me wanting to do it, I kind of came to the conclusion that I think it's like the Supreme Court once said something along the lines of "I know it when I see it," and I think that for a lot of people in security, a pen test is kind of a thing that you know it when you see it, but it's kind of hard to really wrap your head around. And there's lots and lots of different definitions, and I'm sure that there's ways of interpreting it. But I think for me, a pen test is an opportunity to test the way that your entire security program or apparatus responds to adversarial behavior. If it's if you're actually trying to replicate specific adversaries, or if you're trying to test specific systems on how they behave to real world style attacks. That to me is a pen test, and it can be really broad. And I'm sure, some people would say that a red team is not necessarily a red team engagement, not necessarily a pen test, or a purple team, or a breach attack simulation, kind of whatever you want to call it with the marketing speak. I think those are all kind of just subsets of pen tests, and the pen test is the broader, category that they all fall into. Does that make sense?
We're not here to make sense. We're here to discuss deep philosophical hacking issues. Scott, do you have a spin on that? How, Scott, how do you define it? Liam, how do you define it? We'll go around the horn, and everybody can give their out of the gate definition.
Oh, fine. I don't count. It's okay. Whatever.
Well,
you know what? How about
Josh? If you need to hear me say your name,
I'm going
to kick it to you first. Josh, go.
How do you define me first? Test? Oh God. All right. So pen tests. This is a really difficult thing, and we actually asked a gazillion people. I think we asked 30 or 40 people, Scott, and we did this separately together.
That's close to a gazillion.
That's close to a gazillion. Close. We asked 35 or 40 people.
It's a rounding error.
It's close. Come on, lost in the noise. No big deal. And we asked a lot of people.
Counts in horseshoes and hand grenades.
What is a pen test?
Mm-hmm.
And we got back so many different answers that it wasn't even funny. And the problem is, I'm going to go a little broader here. Some people thought that a pen test was when you broke in, got your asset information, money, whatever it is, and got traded that. And some people said, well, no. If you have
Let's move on to Scott, since Josh
you guys are
is freezing up a little bit.
Oh, it's all right. What Josh is saying while he's clipping is that we went out to a lot of people and we've asked them what that kind of event inside of security looks like. What is their definition? We couldn't get a straight answer, right? Everybody's definition has been completely different about that event, right? So in my mind, when dealing with a pen test, right, it's about exploring vulnerabilities and how they relate to attached systems inside of your network, right? So you may have vulnerabilities, like we all do, that aren't tested, that could be blockbusters inside of network defense, right, and just blow it up completely. But you won't know that until you get to the actual pen test event. So, Jeff, what's yours?
No, I was going to have Liam go next and save the best for last. Me.
I save the best for last. All right, so I'm going to play on both sides, right? So I played both the consultant and being on the inside of things. And one of the things that come across is that everybody talks about the defense in depth, right? And that last thing, what they talk about is like enterprise vulnerability management. So it goes back and saying, okay, do you do a vulnerability test? Yes. Do you then pass some of that information to a pen test process? No. Then how do you know what the risk level is of a vulnerability rather than requiring on something if it's exploitable or not? And then on the other side of things is saying, okay, being the on the inside is I want to test it because I want to test my systems to see if they are vulnerable, and using Metasploit and other solutions out there. But then all about web applications as well as part of pen testing, because a lot of times when being on both sides, sometimes it gets lost in translation. Everybody thinks it's network-based pen testing, and forget about web application, because now a lot of companies are developing their own web applications for internal use. They're pushing stuff out to AWS and Azure Web Services. So I think there's a commonality of people's perception of where do you bring some level of pen testing into your environment and who does it, and do you need to include it in SDLC process as well, because of you've got software developing making web applications, and 9 times out of 10 you talk to your software developers, they have no idea what you're talking about. They just assume that some automated process will tell them that they've got some insecure code and they'll go and fix it, but there's nobody doing some code verification or any of the other types of pen testing that's out there.
Okay, it's interesting the take you just took on that, Liam, and I appreciate it. Thank you. My turn. And I don't want to belabor it, but I'm not sure that everybody on this show, I don't talk about my past a whole lot on this show, but just in case anybody doesn't know, I started pen testing in 1992 at the National Security Agency. In fact, I was part of one of the pioneering members of the first, what came to be known as the first NSA Red Team, not our terminology, but that's what we're known as in the folklore. So I've been doing pen testing a long time. Well, I did pen testing a long time ago. I actually stopped pen testing 2004-ish, 2005-ish for 2 main reasons. Lesser reason was I was working with guys that were much better at it than I was in terms of being able to write scripts on the fly and automate some of our testing activities. They were much younger, hungrier, and eager. I was more puzzle solving, analyzing, how do we make this better, which was my second main reason for getting out of pen testing. I got frustrated that we would go in, pen test a customer, come back 6 months later, run the exact same pen test, get the exact same results. Nothing had been fixed, nothing had been changed, and I sought a better, different way of getting the message across to customers that, hey, you've got problems that you need to fix. So that's my background, and the context for my definition of a pen test sort of echoes what Dzag said in terms of it is designed to be a test of your defenses. And that would include, in these days, these modern times, your automated defenses, your technology defenses, but also ultimately the people behind the technology. Presumably you have somebody that's responsible for monitoring, responsible for security, responsible for reviews of logs and things like that. So a pen test ideally is a test of your defenses. Live fire is near to real world. It's really getting annoying, Scott, but I love you. Keep it going.
Okay, I will. Challenge accepted.
Yeah, it's fine. I guess my biggest beef with pen testing is, I've got several beefs with pen testing in the modern world. If you go out to the show notes, one of my first talks, in fact, my first talk that I gave in the hacker community in this sort of second generation of me being in the security world, coming back to the security community after what I called being in PCI purgatory, was a talk entitled, Do We Still Need Pen Testing? And it's a talk based on me hearing Ed Scotus give a keynote about how to give the world's best pen test, and me thinking, wow, I haven't been exposed to the hacker side or the security side of the world in like 10 years or so. What's changed? What's different? And being bitterly disappointed that not much had changed and not much is different. So his premise was lots of good juicy findings, lots of resources and time, unlimited resources in terms of conducting the testing and having all sorts of lots of juicy findings and neat things that you discover. And I sat there thinking, my idea of a perfect pen test is you fail, or at the very least you're detected. That's my idea of a perfect pen test. Now, my exposure to pen testing while I was a QSA in the PCI world was mostly reviewing the annual pen test reports that my customers were submitting to meet their PCI requirement. I would say definitively that, and this may sound a little bit arrogant, but I have not seen an actual pen test report, what I would call a pen test based on my definition of pen test, in probably 15 or 16 years. And I would even argue that the work that I was doing back when I was working for a company where we were offering pen tests, even those weren't really pen tests. Some of them were. Some of them we did have the objective of, can you detect us? Can you catch us? We're going to be poking around and see if you can find us, see if you can detect us. We did do that, not all the time. Most of the time, what we were doing at the end of the day was vulnerability assessment. And I draw the line between vulnerability scanning or vulnerability assessment and pen testing. And this might sound a little bit of extreme, but if your desire in the whatever activity that you're trying to hire a third party for, or if you've got people that can do it yourself, is for the purpose of discovering vulnerabilities, it's not a pen test. Pen testing should not be about vulnerabilities at all, other than stringing the vulnerabilities together, exploiting the vulnerabilities. Yes, that's part of it. But much more so, the pen test is supposed to be, in my opinion, focused on emulating the threat, trying to do the things that the real bad guys are doing, again, for the purposes of testing your defenses, for the purposes of detecting, of assessing how well your security team is doing at catching, detecting that there's bad things happening. I'll shut up now. Somebody set me straight.
Yeah, but unfortunately in security, for kids that are just coming out of college or people that are just getting into the industry, pen testing by itself seems to be the new sexy, or it's always been the sexy, right? Like compliance, the stuff that we live, eat, breathe, sleep, and do, even though we feel and we know that through multiple times of doing this that it drives budgets, it's pen testing that gets all of the accolades, right? So yeah. How do we take something that's supposed to be sexy, fun, in your face, cool? Hey, I just popped your box, right? How do we take that and turn that into something like a compliance routine? Should it be driven by compliance? Should it be the findings go into compliance? Go ahead, Josh.
We don't even know what the hell it is. Like, we literally don't. I mean, you guys, I apologize, I had to restart, so I missed some of what you talked about. But like, Jeff, even in what you said, which I caught most of when I came back on, but even in what you said, you didn't define a pen test. You said a pen test should include these things and should include these things. But is that the complete definition of a pen test? You said it shouldn't include vulnerabilities, for example. Okay, vulnerability should already be found, and with a vuln scan, for example. Or in your world.
Let me back up and give you my short definition, because you were probably rebooting. A pen test, in my opinion, should be a test of your defenses. It's a test of your security readiness, your security responsiveness. It's any amount of activities and things that might happen that emulate a threat to see how well you can hold up against an attack or an attempt to breach.
You're wrong.
I'm going to ask an inflammatory question.
Wait. I need to finish this.
Okay,
I'm sorry, but Jeff, no offense. And I've got an explanation for this. Bear with me for a second, but you're wrong. Because what you just said was, I want the test of my defenses. Okay, assuming they're pen testing me. So they're going to test my defenses. To do so, they must break in. Yes? Am I correct, or am I wrong in what you're saying?
It's open-ended. That might be something
to break in. Am I correct? Because
that's sort of implied in penetration is that you're breaking into something, you're entering something. Penetration, think about what the word implies.
Now, here's the problem. If you are attempting to break in somewhere, and let's assume you succeed in breaking in somewhere, does that mean that you have determined empirically all of the different places I could break in, or simply the one that I have successfully broken in through?
Yes.
No.
What? Absolutely.
Tell me a pen test company.
No, absolutely. There's no implication that you've discovered all the ways that you could get in.
Okay, sorry.
And that's an important point. That's an important point to bring out, though. But to me, if you're finding all the ways that you can get in, that's not a pen test.
Well, then do you go back to the process of discovery, enumerate, vulnerability mapping, and then exploit, right? Then goes back to what you were saying, Josh, before then. If I do a discovery and enumerate and then vulnerability mapping, I could potentially see the full landscape of potential vulnerabilities. And then if I map that to an exploit, right, whether it's available in the wild or something I have to craft myself, if it's blind, whatever, then I'm potentially maybe targeting more than one potential entry point into a web application or to a server or to a network.
We literally wrote definitions of pen tests, Scott and I, because we kept coming across people that were like, that's me, Josh Marpet. Quadling. Sorry, we got asked, like, what's the host with the hat's name again? It's Josh. Hi. I'm talking to
we call him
name.
Doofus.
Totally cool.
But go ahead.
Doofus? Totally cool. I answer to most anything. Don't worry about it. All right. No. In all seriousness, we've got a question. Like, we wrote different definitions of pen tests based on whether you're holistically checking the entire environment, a holistic check, if you will, of all the different possible entry points. Or you're saying, this is a really good entry point. I'm going to take this one, go for the gold, break in, get the assets, and and get back out, exfiltrate. Okay, those are two different types of pen tests. Yet you could argue that they're both pen tests, but they're diametrically opposed almost. So the problem is that I think
I'm arguing that one is and one isn't, and I'm trying to
which
get
one is?
Yeah, but wouldn't that be the definition of being diametrically
which one isn't? We're almost never going to agree then, because this is really funny. So, and really quickly, like, the backstory is, like, in looking at all the different presentations and stuff and doing some research, every single presentation I've ever seen on pen testing, including my own, made sure to define what the heck pen testing is in the beginning of it. I think Jeff, yours did a whole bunch, like, even one, there was another one on the day of B-Sides Boston, and they defined it as well. So it's almost as if it's easier to just say what is not a pen test, and then everything else just kind of lumps in.
But I don't know if pen testing is self-interpretation, though? Can that be open then? Because a lot of people have a different perspective of what they think pen testing is. So going back to what Scott had said earlier about compliance, should compliance have some level of mandate so we put some structure around the term pen test rather than leaving it open-ended? And then you have these results and you're looking and saying, hey, this is a pen test. Okay, I just did something simple and I passed it over to an automated process, but I got a result. But does that mean then I'm compliant because I pseudo did a pen test because it says it does, and that's what the application says it does automatically? But what does that mean from a compliance standpoint? Is it just the checkbox to saying that I've done it? But what does actually a pen test mean? And is there a standardization across the board? Because you said before, we're not going to agree on multiple different areas of pen testing. So somebody needs to put a stake in the ground and say, okay, from a compliance level, here's what we expect pen testing to be.
So I'm going to actually,
it's an open-ended question to people to answer. So
I'm going to actually show you something, guys. I think you can see this. You should be able to see just the first 3 columns, which is, we actually tried to define pen testing in different levels.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I don't know if you can see this. Can you read this? I can make it bigger.
Yeah.
Okay. We said level 1 is a threat scoping. That's exploitability checking. That's that holistic check. Okay. What's the status of all my windows and doors? And then level 2 is a targeted threat. That's going for elevated privileges, privilege escalation.
Mm-hmm.
This is going for breaking in one spot, the best spot, getting in, getting the money, the asset, the whatever, and then exfiltrating all the way. Okay. And so we actually determined that there's different levels of pen testing. It really shouldn't be level 1 and 2. It's just
Josh,
sort of an A and B thing.
For people that can't see this.
What's that? Yeah, sure. So for what we said was a level 1 threat scoping is exploitability checking. And in layman's terms, what's the status of all my windows and doors? Tell me about all my different entry points that someone could use to break in. It's not a vulnerability scan. It is going farther than a vulnerability scan. It is attempting to exploit all the windows and doors, all the entry points, but it's not going for the gold, going for the thing in the safe in the central office. Then we've got a level 2 targeted. Sorry,
Josh, hold on one second. For everything that you're about to hear, you have to think about the house model. What can you do to a house, right? And that's going to really help bring everything that Josh is about to talk about together for you. Go ahead, Josh.
And then we said for a level 2 targeted threat, this is not a threat scoping. This is a targeted threat. Can a professional burglar pick the lock on my front door, break in, find my safe, steal my safe, or break open my safe, grab my stuff, and then get out the door, exfiltrate? Okay, so this is not finding all the entry points. This is picking an entry point, going in through that entry point, getting to the assets, taking the asset, and getting the heck out and exfiltrating. Then we added some other stuff. There's threat teaming, purple teaming stuff. There's red team engagement. This is when we physically break in, full scope, whatever. A web app pen test. There's all kinds of other things. Don't get me wrong. Some niche things, API testing, mobile testing, OT testing, stuff like that. But the point that we're talking about in terms of pen testing is we really broke it up into 4 big pieces. And that was a holistic exploitability check, a targeted threat check for a single entry point that you can break in and get the stuff, purple teaming, threat teaming, and a red team engagement, which is a full scope, everything. We don't care. We're going to do everything possible. Those are monstrously expensive. Okay.
So Josh, you've had enough time. Let me suggest to you, Josh, that everything that you're describing, that you're lumping as variations or on a theme, or you're putting it up under the umbrella of penetration test. Maybe, just maybe, everything that you're describing is really something else. Maybe it's a security.
It's a lizard.
Something else. And
like
then
what?
penetration
I'm not
testing.
following.
Well, what I'm trying to say is I think part of the problem is all those different things that you've described, which are legitimate exercises at the right time and the right place for the right customer that needs that right activity. Maybe the problem is that we're calling all those things different aspects of a penetration test, where maybe those are all different aspects of a security test or a vulnerability and threat test or assessment, and that penetration testing, which is what I'm trying to suggest to you, is a very narrowly scoped, finite activity that isn't the umbrella term. It's just another one of the many things that you can do, just the way that you have this list that you've described of all these different things. That a penetration test is an example of a security test or a vulnerability threat assessment activity, just like all those other things are. Does that help you any in where I'm going with trying to define penetration testing?
What I'm hearing is there is no such thing as a pen test. It is a generic category name for different types of exercises, and I'm good with that. Am I correct in what I'm hearing?
Isn't that effectively what you're describing in that spreadsheet you're showing? The
kind
pen
of,
test
yeah. I mean,
pen testing is and maybe we're hitting the nail on the head finally.
Yeah, it's almost like a continuum.
Penetration testing is not a generic umbrella term. To me, it's a specific activity, whereas the industry sort of treats it as a generic umbrella term for a lot of different things.
So do me a favor. In the sort of theme of what I brought up with that spreadsheet, what is a pen test to you?
So to me,
did any of the activities
the first
that I
one of those
described
things was not.
Really? What is it?
I think I've seen it described, and I like this term, a penetration assessment, where it's if you're looking at the different entry points, and if something happens to have like a one-click RCE as an example, then okay, it might try to exploit that. But without taking it any further, I don't think it's a valid pen test. I think it is something else. It is because it's not for me, the aspects that is among the most important is a lot of times you'll find that you might have, if we're talking about vulnerabilities, you might have a whole bunch of different vulnerabilities spread throughout your environment, and on their own, they're just kind of okay. But an expert or someone with experience will be able to say, okay, I can take this one over here and combine it with this thing over here, and then I can the sum is great. It's greater than the sum of the parts, that you can string together multiple different vulnerabilities, and they might not even be technical vulnerabilities. It could be just a configuration mismatch, or some just you happen to find credentials over here, and there's a web server over there that you can put the credentials in, and suddenly you're admin on a system. Something along those lines is stringing together the multiple different facets in order to get a result that is greater than you can get from just attacking one specific thing. That to me seems to be.
Hang on a second. I agree with you, but you're using, from my point of view, what I'm hearing is that you have a romantic association with sort of the mythical of the Silicon Cowboy, and the
Silicon Unicorn.
No,
penetration. Where are you going, Josh?
No. Oh dear God, Jeff, you bad man, you. No, what I was saying is, we think of when we say that pen testing is sexy, what are we talking about? We're talking about, I broke into the NASA using a Django'd, website that was, I was able to hack the mainframe, and the Gibson was right there, man. Come on, give me a fucking break, okay? Excuse my language. The point is that we have to stop with the romanticism and the jacked in, decked cowboy thing. Like these are tests, these are exercises, and that I think was a great word, by the way, Jeff. Thank you. These are security exercises. Now we can lump them under a categorical label of pen test. That's fine. We're going to do a pen test, but the next two words that should come out of anybody's mouth are what kind or what type. What do you mean by that?
Right, so you have like the network pen test, a web app pen test. You might have a social engineering, physical pen test. Like you can theoretically do a pen test without ever touching a computer.
Absolutely.
It's a continuum, in effect.
And it's not just, and it's, I don't want to use the word continuum because that implies that there's lesser and greater. What I want to say is that there's different types or subcategories of penetration test. There is, a holistic exploitability check.
Josh, are you saying that our hot seat question is implying there's a lesser and greater between security and compliance?
No. But between the different types of pen tests in that category, in that area. And I think that
careful how you word things, sir.
Verbiage is important. We should know, whether it's PCI or not to PCI. That is the question. So we have to. And yes, I'm going for the counter.
Two more. Can we get there? Two more.
We've got a
you just
whole
want me to
other.
say PCI
We got
more
a
times?
whole other segment.
You just want me to say PCI 2 or 3 or 5 more times?
I
can PCI
have not
everything.
yet begun to talk PCI.
Well, I got a question then to everybody.
Dude.
Then is
Please.
so has services or security service companies or people that think they're doing information security consulting services have muddied the water for the term pen testing, right? Because a lot of people, when you go and talk to them, especially organizations where you ask for the pen test, they haven't got a clue what it is. They just know that they need it because somebody in compliance says, hey, you need to do a pen test. Now they'll contact their VAR or their IT service provider, and they'll say, "Hey, I'll do a pen test." And 9 times out of 10, sometimes it ends up just being a vulnerability assessment that they'll do, and they hand them to them and say, "Yep, we've done the pen test." Or they'll go and get some automated tool and have it run once and not exploit anything, but just show them that they did a tickle test but didn't do anything. How do you think it's being muddied enough that nobody knows?
Add that to your spreadsheet, Josh.
I am going to add tickle test.
So,
excuse me, sir.
Liam,
we're here to do a tickle test on your network.
Liam, you're raising the point that the terminology and the definitions and scope and goal and all that has been muddy.
Yep.
I don't necessarily blame the vendors. I actually at this point would actually blame PCI. Because for the first 10 years or so of the PCI data security standard, while there was a requirement to perform an annual pen test, there was precious little in the way of defining what constituted a pen test, which left the door open for anybody to come in with just about any methodology, using scans or not, automation or not, and call it a pen test. I mean, but quite frankly, in the early days of PCI, if I was looking for a pen test report from a customer and they were asking me, what do I need to do? I'm like, well, the way the requirement's written, you could pretty much just run an Nmap scan of your environment and give me the results. And that would meet the scant criteria that existed at the time. Now, PCI Council, to their credit, they have evolved and they have come up with a methodology requirement within the PCI standards. So even if they can't come up with a definition, they expect you to have a definition of penetration testing and execute it on at least an annual basis. But they also have guidance in terms of what they mean by penetration testing, which is more or less on track with everything we've discussed, if we're thinking about pen testing being that broad generic umbrella term. But where they continue to fall short is that, to me, where I come from, the background that I come from, what constituted a real pen test was real people at a keyboard trying things manually and not simply doing automated scans or automated tools. And we didn't have the automated tools back then. It was much more, the conversation in the early days was manual versus automated. And I know that that's changed a little bit. Our landscape in terms of technology and capability is a little bit different now. But it was always about, no, you got to have somebody at a keyboard looking at what's there, thinking about how can I string different things together, how can I work this, play this, manage that. That is, to me, the ultimate art of a pen test or discriminant, is you got to have somebody thinking and trying to be creative and trying to hack and figure things out. That is described in the guidance from the PCI Council, but at the end of the day, they say your methodology should have that. They don't require it, and that's where I think they did the classic cop out. Is they threw that should word in, which leaves the door open to grand interpretation. Just about anything goes. Run a vulnerability scan, have somebody look at it and say, "Oh yeah, that looks exploitable." Boom, it's a pen test.
And that's where I've had it where in the probably in the last 6 months sitting down with an organization, and I've talked to them and said, okay, what are you using for right now for pen testing? Oh, we haven't got to that yet. We're going to go and create a lab and do pen testing in a lab. And I'm like, I asked them, well, what's that going to help you with? Oh, yeah, we're just going to throw up some Windows servers and say that we're doing some pen testing, and that just gives us the checkbox, and we're going to do it in a lab. And I'm like, well, what about your applications that you have out there? Oh, no, we're not going to touch them because they're production. I'm like, okay, so then you're just going to focus primarily on this lab that basically doesn't have any essence of it being a true production. It's just you throwing up some machines and you're basically doing yourself a little lab to test on, oh, can I run Metasploit? Can I run this? Can I do Nikto? Can I run some Linux, Linux kernels and so forth and assess them? But their term was that, yeah, that's what we're going to do because that just gives us that checkbox, and we're a PCI environment and our QSA is happy with it.
So they're literally
the
testing
question
the pen
is
that they
like,
use to
would
check
a
the
pen
box.
test would a pen test actually help against something like, oh gee, I don't know what's going on in the news right now with SolarWinds? You know, if we sit back and say, well, we've done a pen test, we're PCI compliant, we're HIPAA compliant, we're 853 compliant, but still get after the supply chain attack that's going on, right? And it's been going on for months at this point. We're only just now learning about it, right? How can a pen test actually help with defining what actually is a problem, right? And
you guys are, excuse me, Scott. You guys are asking great questions, and you're setting up the shift in focus that I want to take in the second segment. Let's take a quick break, and we'll come back and we'll start talking about why pen test. What are the purpose and the goals? What do you get out of a pen test? So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
RSA offers business-driven security solutions that provide organizations with a unified approach to managing digital risk and designed to effectively detect and respond to advanced attacks, manage user access control, and reduce business risk, fraud, and cybercrime. For a limited time, get mobile multi-factor authentication from RSA Secure ID Access for free to help secure your remote or dynamic workforce long-term. Leverage push notification, biometric, and one-time password authenticators to secure access to your cloud applications, on-premises systems, legacy systems, privileged accounts, and more at no cost for 6 months. For more information, visit securityweekly.com/RSA Security. Did you know that over 63% of cyber breaches are caused by a third-party vendor? CyberGRX is on a mission to modernize third-party cyber risk management. Built on the market's first third-party cyber risk exchange, CyberGRX arms you with fast and accurate data, a proven and innovative approach, so you can make rapid, informed decisions and confidently engage with partners. Learn how partnering with CyberGRX will help you become cyber certain. Visit securityweekly.com/CyberGRX. Cyber risk and compliance automation is finally here. Legacy GRC systems cannot simplify the complex use cases and deliver powerful automation that cyber teams need. CyberSaint's integrated risk management solution ingests data from your existing tech stack, dynamically lighting up controls using patented AI. Leverage your expertise and showcase business value. Let your risk and compliance solution work for you. See why the most forward-thinking CISOs of the Fortune 500 support their teams with CyberSaint. Maximize your cybersecurity program today. Visit securityweekly.com/CyberSaintSCW.
Welcome back to Security and Compliance Weekly. Hey, do you always end up missing our live streams? Do you need somewhere to flag Security Weekly podcasts that you want to listen to? You can do this by subscribing on your favorite podcast catcher or on our YouTube channel. Also, you can sign up for our mailing list. And finally, you can join our Discord server to stay in the loop on all things Security Weekly. Where do you start by doing all this? Go to securityweekly.com/subscribe. Also, if you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on one of the shows, or if you want to just worm your way onto the show like Dmitry did today, you can suggest guests for visiting by going to securityweekly.com/guests and fill out the form. Find us on the Discord server to suggest topics. We review all the suggestions and we'll get back to you once we've reviewed your request. All right, let's get back to this discussion. You guys were setting up at the end of the first segment where I kind of wanted to shift gears and go, and that is generically at a high level, what is the place, what is the purpose, what is the role of a penetration test in this whole grand scheme of things that we today call cybersecurity? More specifically, if you're a company that wants to have a pen test performed, and to touch on what you said a little bit, Liam, I think this is where it gets very muddied and cloudy because the vendors have so much leeway to say what they want to say about pen testing or things that they do that participate or are part of a pen testing process. So let me take a real quick minute to just lay out some of my thoughts based on PCI, actually. And first I'll get the PCI counter up, but also I just want to set the stage for our discussion in the second segment, which is going to be hopefully focused more on what's the point of a pen test, what are you trying to get out of a pen test, what's the purpose or the goal of a pen test, and then and how, if you've determined the goal, how do you most effectively produce a result so that you can achieve your objective. So food for thought, and this is maybe where some of my my feelings come from about pen testing, because I've been exposed to PCI for so long. PCI at a high level is 12 major security requirements revolving around 6 goals, and 6 goals of security is secure your stuff. It's a family show, sort of. Secure your stuff, secure your data, keep everything current, control access, do the security stuff, have it all written down. Those are the 6 goals of PCI at a very high level. Things that are often associated with pen tests, like vulnerability scanning, which is where I When I was starting pen testing, there were no courses, there were no SANS 50 million 500 level courses that you could take to learn how to be a pen tester. We were kind of winging it back in the day, and we came up with a methodology that it's the way you do a pen test, and it's roughly the same as what's being taught today, with one exception. We never put vulnerability scans as part of the pen testing methodology. We simply would do, and I apologize for not knowing the modern terminology. We would do, network probes, TCP/IP port scanning, just to see what was out there and what were they, what were they talking, what ports were they talking. We weren't finding vulnerabilities. Thank you.
Probing all the
PCI. They have a section that's called vulnerability management. Vulnerability management covers two requirements in PCI, and that's requirement 5 and requirement 6. Requirement 5 is antivirus, anti-malware, having some sort of technologies in place that are kept current and they're doing periodic scanning and so on and so forth. That's requirement 5. That's under the umbrella of vulnerability management. 6 is where it gets a little bit more interesting. It's have a program where you determine risk ranking based on whatever your environment is, but have a way of classifying vulnerabilities in terms of risk. Have a regular patch management program. Have change control procedures. Do secure application development. Do it based on things like OWASP. Make sure your developers are trained and are writing secure code. That's the bulk of requirement 5 and requirement 6. Which is what PCI calls vulnerability management. Vulnerability scanning comes much later in requirement 11, where you've secured everything, you've secured the data, you're keeping it current, you're patching, you're monitoring with antivirus, anti-malware, you're patching on a regular basis, you're making changes with change control procedures, and it's authorized. Then you do access control, both physically and logically, and then you get around to the security stuff with like vulnerability scanning. If you follow the logic of it, and I'm not saying it's by design, but I think it is, you're doing a whole lot of activities. You have a whole lot of procedures in place before you ever get around to doing vulnerability scanning. Vulnerability scanning in that context, then, in my opinion, is meant to be more of a safety net to find the things that fall through the cracks, because nobody is perfect at anything. There's always going to be stuff missed or overlooked for whatever reason. And then the ultimate live fire test after doing a vulnerability scan on a regular basis is to do a penetration test. So in that way of thinking, a penetration test is somewhat consistent, I hope, with the way I've defined it initially, that it's a test of your defenses. It's how well have you done setting up your security operations and all the different things that you're doing. How well are you withstanding attack, or how well are you equipped to detect that somebody is attacking you? To me, that's the essence of a penetration test, perhaps with a little bit of a PCI flavor. But this brings to light what's my biggest frustration in our industry, which Liam kind of touched on. You've got sort of the vendor side that in a large way dictates, this is when you should do this is when you should do that. As a perfect example, we've had this big SolarWinds thing happen in the last couple of days. I got my email notices from Tenable last night. Hey, we have a new plugin to help you detect, the presence of whatever vulnerable, and I don't know the details of it yet, I apologize, but whatever's vulnerable in terms of SolarWinds will help you find out if you have it. And to me, that's ass backwards, because vulnerability scanning technologies are meant to be a safety net after you've done a whole lot of other things, not, well, let's try to decide what's wrong with our network. Let's run a vulnerability scan. Or by extension, and this is honestly how I started in pen testing back in the early days, was, well, let's figure out what's wrong with our network. Let's do a pen test. Let's figure out what all the vulnerabilities and the problems and the weaknesses are. And it's that part where I acknowledge that's how we started when I was helping to build methodologies and doing this stuff almost 30 years ago, my God, a liberal 27, 28 years ago, I expected that to evolve to something more like what PCI implies, which is the vulnerability scanning and the penetration testing, however we define it, are much more safety net. How are we doing type of exercises, not, well, let's start everything by doing this kind of stuff, because it is in essence a form of automation, and it's a way that we don't have to think, and we don't have to be in control or have our arms around what's going on in our network. And every time I hear a vendor saying, well, asset discovery, run our tool, I'm like, why not asset discovery? You have an inventory somewhere and you know everything on your network because you have some sort of process in place that controls what gets put on your network. I'll shut up. That's the setting the stage. What's the goal? What's the purpose of a pen test? And how does that influence how we define it? And more importantly, when is it appropriate to do this thing that we call a pen test? And what do we get out of it, gentlemen?
So trying to be able to define what a pen test is what we tried to do in the first segment, and we went all over the place, right? Yep. But I think the one thing that we can all agree on is that pen test has grown to be an amalgamation of multiple activities that result in trying to illuminate issues, problems, or areas of potential compromise on any given system. Right?
Yeah. So
yeah,
and so like if you're going through and you're starting with, well, I need a pen test to find out where all the vulnerabilities and weaknesses are in my network, I think you failed to start with. That'll be my one inflammatory comment today, I guess. But you really should already know where those things might be by having a good understanding of all your assets, having a good understanding of where any technical vulnerabilities are. Well, I think a good use of a pen test would be to help you prioritize remediation if you've got a lot. To say, okay, well, these are the ones that really are, exploitable by in the wild or by a real person. So we should focus on those first, given limited resources. I think that if you don't even know where you might have problems, you really need to get a handle on that first.
Wait, I think
Dude, as a consultant, listen, as a consultant,
was actually
Josh,
the point where you said you need an asset discovery, you need an asset management, you need an asset inventory. You want to be inflammatory? Tell people they actually have to know what's on their network, because none of them bloody well do.
Yes, that's what I was about to say. As consultants, we step into companies all the time and they're like, well, we only have 50 machines. And we say, oh, really? Right? What about your servers? What about your routers? What about your access points? What about everything that requires an IP address? And it comes out being 700 to 1,000 by the time we're done with it. And it's just like, come on, man. You don't even know what your engineering is, let alone where your machines are, let alone what IP space you're using. We literally had somebody tell us, hey, I need my network scanned, right? I need you to find all the machines. Oh, by the way, here's an A class, B class, and C class. Go have fun. And we're like, wait, what? Huh? So getting people to understand their own networks is getting people to understand their own networks is like the first problem that we have to overcome.
Well, the problem you have to overcome is not about whether they need to do it. It's about, okay, my main problem is a resource issue, time, money, and people, right? That's the three issues of why people don't do crap on their network, because they'll say, well, every time I try and focus on something,
there's a fourth one too, Liam, and I'm not to disparage anyone.
No.
Let's say it's naivete. They don't know that they need to, or nobody's holding their feet to the fire.
Respect my naivete.
Or even a trust issue. Maybe they
enter compliance.
Yeah, or they don't believe that it's a real issue, even though the tool says it is. That's often
ignorance. It's the same thing. It's ignorance or naivety or lack of.
I was going to say they're stupid, but I'm trying to be fair and objective, because they're not stupid.
It's not. So it's when you get IT that want to be security, right? And which takes priority. If your IT is your main job, that's going to become your priority. Security takes second fiddle, right? So now you're playing that juggling act, which comes first, and ignorance is always bliss. I'll focus on what I want to do or what I need to do because some VP or some executive says they get this done and get this fixed, or here's an application I need to install it. That's the next 6 weeks. Then security is not going to get focused on. Right?
Yeah, but security is always going to be the second, the second in line, right? Because IT produces the product, therefore IT is turned into into a profit center, not a cost center like security
Correct.
is most of the times. Companies
Correct.
struggle with being able to turn the security team into a profit center and pull it away from a cost center inside of the business, right? Meaning cost center, meaning it's a black hole, right? Much like owning a boat, break out another 1,000, it's a black hole to dump money into. And hopefully, they can protect the product that you're putting out. SolarWinds. So how would you go about doing that and getting somebody to understand that no, security really should be right in line with the other profit centers inside of the business?
That's a good question. It's a good question.
I'm sorry. It was just Jeff's comment about what's the difference between ignorance and apathy, and I actually got it, and we both came out with, I don't know and I don't care.
Well, okay, now I'm looking. Yeah, that's good.
Well, but in the business world, it's a combination of, it's not that they don't care and it's not that they don't know. Very often it's being overwhelmed, not clearly in your job description. People are assuming you do it because you've got IT in your job title. There's a litany of reasons why. Well, it's somebody else's job, and certainly somebody else has got it covered, and so it's all being done. But the bottom line is, don't make me think. Don't put it on me. I don't have time. I don't have the resources. Can we automate it? Is there something to do? Can I set it and forget it? Is there a box I can buy with a blinky light that's, just tell me what colors they need to be? Which is where I love PCI and I hate PCI, because PCI at the end of the day is, in terms of the 500 whatever detailed requirements they are, 60% of it is all about, do you have documentation? Do you have stuff written down in a policy? Or do you have stuff written down in a standard? Do you have all your procedures documented? They call it a formal procedure.
Let's talk about this for a second, Jeff, because I want to build on that, if you don't mind. Because somebody asked about talking about in Discord, I forget who, I'm terribly sorry. Somebody asked about scoping, and
yes,
one piece of paper.
I wanted to bring that up. Yep.
Go for it. If you want to, PCI and scoping is like, it's because in PCI, it's all about the cardholder data environment, the CDE. So obviously the scoping is actually a very important part of PCI. I hope you'd agree with that. And what's interesting is that in other not so carefully designed standards, scoping is very much more difficult to get properly correct. And even in PCI, we've run across situations where we handled the CDE as the scope of everything we did. And we said, let's look at things that are, sorry?
CDE, explain it.
I did, cardholder data environment. I said it a few minutes ago. So, yeah. But we said, let's look at the CDE adjacent servers, and we ran scans and found tens of millions of card numbers because it was another department that shouldn't have even had access to card numbers that was grabbing them, and that was a problem. So even in PCI, scoping is important and sometimes misdone, not by the PCI department or the PCI relevant compliance people or security people, but by the people around it. In this case, it was a department that was grabbing numbers back from the processing company, and they didn't know not to send it to them. It's a relevant contact. Right. So in other standards, how do you scope properly when somebody goes, oh, no, we're not going to do that. That's a production system. Well, that's kind of important. Oh, no, we're not going to do that. That's a system that we just use for testing and code promotion and staging and hot fixes. And, well, isn't that important? So scoping is what the devil? And the Discord is doing some interesting pictures right now.
And that's from a woman too. So
yes.
So I'm glad that you brought up scoping, because I did see, I think it was M that asked the question, and I had already forgotten. So I'm glad that you reminded us to talk about scope. In a PCI context, it's sort of like the way we were talking earlier about how penetration testing has been kind of misused and abused and exploited in terms of unscrupulous vendors trying to sell things. In the early days, when the PCI data security standard was first released, the presumption was this is an assessment of your security program, how you're doing security in your organization, with particular attention to a specific type of sensitive or critical data, which is payment data, cardholder data, CHD. The presumption was you're a flat network and everything is in scope until you unless and until you can prove differently. And so the concept of network segmentation was introduced early, and it was introduced as a way of limiting the scope of the assessment. What is an assessor, a QSA, going to come in and look at and sample and so on and so forth? So the good and the bad of it was that companies sooner or later figured out that, well, if we can isolate things, we don't have to pay God knows how much money to have people come in and look at everything in our network. They can just look at a relatively small percentage of our network. That's cost savings. Let's go for it. Let's start doing scope reduction by creating this thing called a cardholder data environment and isolating it and segmenting it. My problem with that has always been that the motivation was, let's dodge, let's get around not having, let's try to find a way to limit what people are going to look at. I've always assumed as a QSA, meaning that they're not doing all the security stuff that they should be doing according to PCI everywhere else in their network. And you can argue, and I would, that just about everything in the PCI data security standard is stuff that you should be doing in your entire network anyway. I understand that's hard to do, and depending on certain of the requirements. But as a general principle, the PCI standard is a framework of how to do security for your network. The good news is that in companies' efforts to try to limit their scope by trying to isolate systems, to do that and to get a blessing, to get a pass on it, they had to find out where all their card data was through either data flows, process flows, the business flows. Josh, you mentioned it was somebody that, what I heard you saying was it was somebody that had a function that had nothing to do with like a payment, a transaction. It was sort of an over and above thing, which was very often overlooked in the early days of PCI. There was people that interpreted PCI as only having to do with transaction traffic and the systems associated with payment in the early days, where it was, if you read the thing and read the small print, so to speak, anywhere card data, anywhere in your network, wherever it is. And in the early days, card data was everywhere. It was in logs and routers and switches. It was in the accounting department. It was in the marketing department. It was in the groups that were building, customer loyalty programs, because the easiest way to find an individual, the key search discriminant, what was going to be unique to all of them, it was the credit card number. So in terms of scope, I don't even know, does anybody remember what the original question was about scope? Because it's about 200 messages ago.
Yeah, it was basically how scope can change and make useless entirely the results of a pen test, however you define it. We'll not get into that at the moment, but basically it's about how... Interestingly
enough, the PCI has evolved to that the penetration testing now includes, if you have segmented your network and so you've created a card data environment, you're also required now to prove it with a pen test. So part of the pen test objective is to demonstrate network segmentation. Sounds good. The problem is PCI never bothered to define what constituted adequate network segmentation, other than they take sort of there should be complete separation. There should be, it should be sneaker net. There should be an air gap between the card data environment and the rest of your environment, which most people would acknowledge is not terribly practical. So what constitutes a segmented network? Given that you've got Active Directory that's going in and out of supposedly an isolated environment, you've got administrators that need to go in and out of an isolated environment, you've got all sorts of technology that's automating network monitoring, security controls, all sorts of other controls, the payment transactions, there's all sorts of stuff where there's stuff going in and out of this supposedly isolated segmented network. So my company, and I'm not saying it's good or bad or indifferent, but we offer penetration testing services, and what we do to do the network segmentation validation is basically do an Nmap. Just put us somewhere outside of your CDE, give us some address space inside your CDE, and we're going to do an Nmap scan or something equivalent to, what's communicating, what can we see, ports and services in and out of the network. And there's not even a value judgment made on, we've seen 10, 20, 50 communication paths, therefore you fail. It's simply, this is what's visible. And somebody else has to decide, is that meeting whatever the objective of segmentation was? Nobody defines it.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go. I'm talking too much. You guys go.
Yeah, I just want to add to that and say, if you're doing segmentation and you're scoping out your pen test, right? Guilty by association. So if you're not focusing on this, basically not included or not in the scope of your purview from a security standpoint, PCI, then how do you look at the risk factor of, crap rolls downhill, right? So if you're doing kind of like a supply chain, you got people sitting on this unrestricted environment connecting back into your CDE environment to perform actions, right? Whether it's admin, reconciliation, information, or transactions going back into SAP, different things for banking stuff. And if you're not paying attention to that information, then what's the risk associated of just focusing on the security aspect of that and not including the other environments? If PCI says, let's focus on this, or we just use PCI, it could be any other regulatory compliance or standard out there. But what's stopping people to say, hey, let's include this in that realm so that becomes secure, so we don't get guilty by association, because that becomes a crappy Swiss cheese environment. But we've made our CDE environment like Fort Knox, but it only takes one path to be able to break down that bridge that you've that wall that you've created. So how do you cope with that as individuals, right? So,
well, ironically, and to bring it back to our topic du jour, that's where I think a pen test could be an opportunity to actually demonstrate. You have a supposedly segmented, isolated environment with maybe a couple channels open for, administrative, network health type of stuff, whatever it is. Let somebody that's like a bona fide, pen tester, hacker, can use their brain and kind of problem solve and figure it out. Can they break into it or not? I've never seen that. All I've seen is, well, here's a port scan. This is the services. This is what we see. This is what it looks like. But that's, to me, is where, in terms of what penetration testing could be, at least for PCI customers, it could be an opportunity to really kick the tires on and prove or disprove what you're asserting in terms of network segmentation, in terms of security controls that you have on your environment, and so on and so forth. But I never see that. All I see is what's commonly become accepted as a pen test, which, to paraphrase, is a glorified vulnerability scan with maybe a little bit of Metasploit thrown in on top, and a cover letter.
You bring up a really good point, and I want to ask everybody, what pieces should you expect to see in a pen test that you bring in an outside contractor to complete? What are the key elements of that report that you look for?
Oh, look for it, but I've never seen.
It does. Well, to me, it doesn't really matter. Like if you sit back and you say, okay, I want a pen test of my HIPAA environment, right? To make sure that it meets high trust standards, right? Or PCI standards, right? What in the report do you want to see? What do you not want to see? Like, what's the good, the bad, and the ugly of the reports that you have seen in the past? And how do we steer people who are listening to the show to say, this is really what should be in the report that hits most of the compliance sets. This is the way the report should be laid out. Like, what are the different flavors that the four of you think should be in the report?
Well, it's funny that you put it that way. Excuse me, I go first.
No, go ahead. Please.
I've been giving a lot of thought to this lately, and pretty much the question you just asked. And given that I'm like, I've never seen a real pen test. I've never seen a real pen test report. The way I'm narrowly defining it, which is test. Can you break in? Can you be caught? That type of thing. Given what's become sort of accepted in the industry as a pen test and what is certainly accepted as a pen test for PCI purposes, for compliance purposes, I wonder if there was a company out there that actually did a pen test the way I define it, which is, and to answer your question, Scott, what I would see in a report is, okay, let's say the objective is, can you break in? So you give the pen testing company a red flag. So it's a capture the flag exercise. Can you get here to this specific point? Or it's a little bit more generic. We've got sensitive data in our environment. Can you get to any of it? Can you see it? And by extension, can you exfiltrate it? Because that's the ultimate goal. If you were performing a pen test, sort of the industry norm, you're just getting a list of vulnerabilities. What I typically see in terms of a pen test report is, here's a list of vulnerabilities, and they're categorized, critical, high, medium, low. Which begs the question, because the PCI requirement is do a pen test and resolve all exploitable vulnerabilities. And then you get a report that says, here's your vulnerabilities, critical, high, medium, low, and you're not saying whether they are exploitable or not, which, conventional wisdom says, how do you prove it's exploitable? You exploit it. Or you take the word of a vulnerability scanning technology tool and a CVSS score that says it's exploitable based on certain conditions. I don't know. That's where it falls apart. But what I never see is, and what I would love to see is, we came up with this 3, 5, 7 different attack scenarios based on the goal of capturing the flag. We attempted it. This one failed. This one failed. This one failed. This one we got so far, and then it failed. This one worked. This one we were caught in the first 10 minutes. This one we were detected and blocked after 80 minutes. And at the end of the day, we got in or we didn't get in, and we got in this way if we did get in, and you didn't see us and you didn't catch us, so you fail from that perspective. Totally different from a list of vulnerabilities and their exploitability. So
you're saying elevate the pen test game, right, and turn it more into a purple team report than an actual pen test report. Is that correct?
You're assuming that I am agreeing on your definition, if not acknowledging your definition of pen test and purple teaming.
So I have seen a report the likes of which you described, Jeff.
That's awesome.
Right. So there's hope for the industry. This is great. But so again, like my view is that purple teaming, red teaming, et cetera, are extensions on the standard network pen test. But I think that the purple teaming idea of having a real collaborative effort, of being able to say, okay, the pen tester's going in, okay, and then the security operations center says, okay, yep, you triggered this alert. Here's a screenshot of it. Make sure to include it in your report. That way, say, okay, yeah, we know, even though you may have gotten in, we didn't notice you. So we're not just sitting on our feet, sitting on our thumbs doing nothing. There's definitely, that's probably among the best kind of reporting that you can get, where you get, and to your point, here's the exploits that did work, here's the exploits that didn't work, and perhaps having some explanation as to why they might not have worked or why they did work. It's always troubling.
Here's my question, Dmitry, and I've been pondering this for a while now. The type of test and reporting you're just describing, which I love. I wonder if that was submitted for a company's PCI assessment. So you got a QSA sitting there, let me see your pen test report, and that type of report was handed to them when they're accustomed to seeing a list of vulnerabilities, critical, high, medium, low, and we've remediated them, patched, or whatever. I question whether a QSA would accept it as meeting the requirement.
I'm with you there, because that's part of my problem, my internal love-hate relationship with compliance, is that sometimes you can't be fully open and honest because you're going to get caught in some weird technicality. I'd rather say, here are the things that we know we need to fix, or here is an example of, yep, they got in on this thing, but we did 90% of everything else well. So there needs to be some credit.
Mm-hmm.
Like the organization is trying, and it's not just you failed the pen test, so that's it, you're done. There's got to be some give and take. And maybe that's the wrong perspective. I'm not sure.
No, I think you hit something there, and I think the thing itself is, I've seen and from experiences, is that a lot of compliance people don't have a lot of technical background, so they'll just go what's actually written in front of them, and they will either interpret it to their own in perspective, and then look at something and say, no, that's not it, because they have no understanding of what goes behind it, right? To actually generate that report or generate the details, what's the scope of it is, and I think that's where I think if there was a kind of a happy medium, that you have the tactical aspect of cybersecurity, right, and then you have the strategic, which is compliance. But I think there has to be an overflow where some of the strategic need to have a technical background in order to understand what the pen test is, rather than trying to think, okay, here's what PCI says, here's what HIPAA says, here's what NIST says, here's what the top 20 from CIS says, or anything, these things out there. They're interpreting that for themselves of what they would want to see, and then goes back to yours, Jeff. They probably wouldn't, because it doesn't state that in a document they're reading, because they don't know the technical, and is that going to meet the standards, right? So I think that's a problem as well that we have in cybersecurity from a strategic standpoint. Not have enough technical experience, and you have the tactical having so much technical experience, enough of understanding compliance, and they can marry the two together. But then when they pass it across where they need to, then that's when it fumbles, because they don't accept it.
Josh, you still thinking I'm wrong? Or have you come
Sorry,
around
about
a
what?
little bit? Well, you said I was wrong in my definition of pen test early on.
Yeah, you
Given
were.
the way our conversation,
Yes, you are.
I am wrong in the sense of how the industry accepts the definition and uses it as an umbrella term. I am pushing the envelope, trying to suggest that a pen test is a specific type of a something else. And
I
that
disagree.
something else would be, well, I'm trying to change the world. You can't disagree
And that's
with me.
valid. I can say that you can try to push your view and get everybody to accept it, until you can get everybody to accept your definition, which, by the way, I like your definition. It's actually a very valid one. I like it. Until you can get everybody to accept your definition, the best we can do is say that pen test is a generic term with no inherent meaning other than as a categorical label for a whole slew of different kinds of security exercises. Is exercises the best word? Any of which could be labeled as a pen test, but they are each individual types of pen tests.
So let's take the last few minutes, and everybody, we got to drop in a few minutes because Johnny's got to move on. But we'll take this up in the after party. Everybody give their thoughts, at least one or two, or half of one, whatever you have in your brain. What could a pen test be? What should a pen test be? What is a right way that perhaps doesn't exist today of performing a pen test and getting the most, which was the question that we tried to answer and didn't on Paul Security Weekly last week. How do you get the most out of a pen test? Thoughts?
It all comes down to scope, right? Even though there are compliance regimes that currently say we need a semi-annual or biannual or once quarterly test, right? That test is defined as per the scope of the compliance regime, right? So if you can give the accurate scope to the people that you're hiring to do the work and make sure that they give you the product, and then work with them on the report, right? Don't just let it sit. work with them on the report to make sure that it answers the compliance regimes, you're going to get that ROI much quicker than just saying, well, I have a list of IPs, here's a black box, have fun. Oh, by the way, I want to know absolutely everything you did.
So the knowing everything you did isn't necessarily a bad thing. But and I'm with you on, you know, I would say that, you know, if you go back to like one of the very important DevOps principles of making smaller batch sizes, you know, you can go in and have a pen test and say, here's my entire environment, just go away and hack me. You're going to end up with too many squirrels where they're going to try to go over here and over there and over there.
And the cost is going to be through the roof.
Right. It's not affordable unless you have an internal team, and even then it's expensive. So if you have smaller scoped tests more often, that might actually end up with, you might end up as an organization getting more out of a pen test if we're, you know, strategically, if we're saying, okay, we want to test this one thing, or, you know, this path, or we believe that we have an over-reliance on this one tool. So let's see what happens when that tool is failed. So, you know, we'll scope a test to say, okay, the attacker system that's in our network or whatever is bypassing that tool. What, you know, testing defense in depth. You want to, you know, obviously social engineering is involved. There's a whole bunch of other avenues that you can do. But if we're talking network pen testing, I would think that, because a lot of the regimes as well say, well, you need to have it every year or whenever there's a significant change, and that's like the big thing. I think even PCI says it. And there's my one PCI for the day. But you know, what is a significant change, and that's up for debate. But I think that in the best case scenario, having a test before you make a significant change, like if you're onboarding a new system or changing the authentication method of something, it's a good idea to know, okay, well, you know what you think everything is going to work like, but then have someone go and bang at it and make it do things it wasn't designed to do, then see what breaks, see what falls out. That's a really good use of the time. But again, is, you know, if for an internal team having to hire outside consultants, that can get really costly. So, you know, we're always going to be struggling with it.
Well, the other aspect of it is how you write the report, from being technical to also having non-technical, right? So in my past of developing, you know, pen testing reports is to do a storyboard, right? So we can easily walk through it, kind of like you're building out the scope, the steps that you've taken, but also put in the mindset that an executive level person has to read this to actually allow you to be able to obtain your goals, whether you need to enhance your security budget, buy some additional tools, get some more training and so forth in place. But these are things that I think get lost because a lot of pen testing results end up being more focused on technical. Then you got the technical person trying to convert that into executive jargon, and I think it gets lost in translation because the cop-out is of the security services are not willing to write something that the executive leadership needs to read in that document.
Hey, unfortunately, our time is about up for today. I feel like we're making progress, actually, which is more than I think we were doing last week on the panel. But that's my own impression. Dmitry, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for giving that talk at Besides Boston that got me spun up about this topic again. Liam, thanks for joining us today. To all of my co-hosts and to all of our listening audience, I want to wish you a happy holiday, restful, safe, be socially distant, wear the damn mask. Let us know when you're first in line to get a vaccine. We will come back again, flipping the calendar. I think we'll be back on January 5th, if I'm not mistaken. And we will keep going. Until then, thank you for listening and engaging. We will, of course, jump over to the after party chat on Discord now. We can keep talking for a little bit. There's been a lot of questions and a lot of good comments raised in the Discord, and we weren't able to pull it all into the conversation. So that's going to wrap us for Security and Compliance Weekly for 2020. Take care. Be safe. Be secure. Woo-hoo! Until next year.